Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is the 168th Scientific Governance and Risk meeting for MakerDAO. My name is Peyton Rose. I go by Pros11 online, and I'm one of the governance facilitators. I'll be kind of leading or moderating our meeting today, mostly just here to keep things on track. We really appreciate all the smart, dedicated people that are joining us on the call today. Also, those of you that are watching the recording back later. For those of you that are here, just a few housekeeping matters. We do encourage open participation, so do ask your questions. If there's a lull in the conversation, feel free to hop on the mic. If you're unable or otherwise do not wish to speak your question, you can drop it in the sidebar. I'm happy to ask it for you at an appropriate time. Yeah, it is being recorded, so be mindful of that. Try not to speak over one another, just so that doesn't sound terrible later. And yeah, thank you all for joining us. We've got a bit of an agenda to get through, so I'll be kind of walking us through there. We start with our more governance updates, both on the votes, current MIP proposals, and stuff going on in the forum. Then we'll have time for a community discussion around the kind of prep for alternative market conditions. Basically, what do we do if things stop going well? And then if there's still time after that, we'll open things up for open discussion. So if you do have kind of unrelated questions that you drop in the chat, this is when we'll be circling back to them. Yeah, so without further ado, let's get straight into things. Pretty busy week, or last couple of weeks really, for votes. So a lot of polls to update you on. All 6 that ended this week did pass. That includes changes to the local liquidation limits. That's the ILCOL, basically how much of a specific collateral type can be auctioned off at one time. We've got the rates proposal that passed. That's changed the WBTC stability fees, as well as an update to the covenant for P1 drop. That's the People's Company Series 1 drop token. We also had the 3 offboarding polls for AVE, Balancer A, and Comp A. They all passed, so you will be seeing those. I'll update that in the next slide, I guess, before I get ahead of myself. 2 green light polls are still ongoing. That would be for the solid block red frog digital coin and the Monetalis, if my Latin pronunciation is still correct, wholesale SME green growth lending. I won't steal Pablo's thunder, but we also have 8 ratification polls. Those are for current MIPs and sub-proposals. That voting also ends on Monday. So if you do plan on leaving your opinion, make sure you get to it soon. There's just a couple of days left in those. Should take us to our executive proposals. Last week's executive did pass. That included parameter changes for GUNI, Rapid Stake ETH, and that D3M over at AVE. We also had the little over 200,000 DAI returned from the Gov Alpha budget to the surplus buffer. Luckily, thanks to some awesome engineering, we have an easier way to do this now, so future returns probably won't need to take place as part of an executive proposal. Yes, DSS Flow, thank you, David. This week's executive, which will go up tomorrow, is a pretty hefty one, so do be on the lookout for that. We have WBTCB onboarding, as well as stability changes to both WBTC-A and kind of updating one for WBTCB. Those local liquidation limits I mentioned earlier, as well as the People's Company covenant change. And then finally, offboarding collaterals, both the 3 that were mentioned, as well as updates to previous ones that we've already initiated our offboarding process to. We'll be updating the liquidation ratios for those. All that stuff will be found in the executive copy, as well as available for tracking in our new spells channel on Discord. Awesome, so that should do it for my side of the governance. I will pass it over to our MIP editor, Pablo, for his update.
Hey everyone, Pablo here with MIPs update. Thank you, Peyton. So it's 4 days until ratification polls for November close. As you know, we had 8 formal submissions, and we're gonna take a quick look at the current state of the vote for them. I think we had a bit of a rocky start with low participation, but things are looking better now. We have 3 coordinated proposal sets. One of them is the DECO resubmission, and we also have ImmuneFi security and sidestream auction services. Moving on to coordinated budgets, We have the content production and resubmission and budget for governance communications and real world finance. Also for real world finance, we have an MKR compensation plan. And finally, we have the MIP6 template amendment proposed by Christian Peterson. I'm not sure pronouncing that correctly. So yes votes are surpassing no votes for all proposals, and they've all reached the minimum positive participation threshold. So yeah, now moving on to stuff in RFC. There's been no new additions in the last couple of weeks. Next slide, please. Just as a reminder. Yeah. So I know that SES is incubating a number of core units, and I think some are soon to hatch. So we'll probably see some new additions shortly. Now moving on, another news. The pinned post that lists the important dates for MIPS has been updated for 2022, and also a couple of links to what I hope are useful resources have been added. My intention is to make this post a bit clearer and more comprehensive, and to keep adding resources to it in the future, and possibly change its title, which I think can be quite opaque to newcomers. Also, I've been reworking on a couple of documents that are not quite ready for debut yet. Can we move to the next slide? Yeah, those documents, they should be pretty shortly. One of them is a MIP editor onboarding manual, and the other is a MIPS portal how to use kind of guide, because I think there might be more to the MIPS portal than meets the eye. And the next slide, I think Artem will talk about this, but I just want to give a shout out to SES and Retro in particular for the coordinated budget transparency maps that they put together. It's a very cool thing to have, and I will be looking into ways to integrate them onto the MIPS portal. And yeah, that's pretty much it from me. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks, Pablo. Retro pointing out that Petru was also a big player in making those come together. So thank you, SES. We appreciate the increase in transparency for the budgets with those. Awesome, that should bring us over to Form at a Glance. I believe Artem will be doing the hosting on that.
Yes, we have a new mic. Check that out.
Quality.
All right. So welcome to the Forum at a Glance, a weekly review of what's happened on the forums for the week of November 11th to November 18th. Let's begin with the week's top announcements. With winter holidays around the corner, Long for Wisdom shares the weekly governance cycle for the next 2 months. For the weeks of December 20th and December 27th, there will be neither weekly polls, executive proposals, or governance and risk calls happening, and normal coverage resumes on January 10th of 2022. Next up. All right. Next up, the SES core unit shares a diagram that overviews each core unit's MIP 40, which they call the MIP map, as earlier mentioned. Their intended purpose is to create an interactive tool to explore all budget structures used in the DAO, and anyone interested in core unit budgets will find it easier to compare, contrast, and explore transactions by engaging with this new tool. Next, the Risk Core Unit presents a sample report on valuable DAI supply growth and risk metrics. This information is meant to support the KPI framework presented earlier by ACE in the monthly strategy review. Metrics from this report will be soon integrated into the risks dashboard for open access to the whole community. And moving on to the top 3 discussions. Zero X Dennis from the Dux Core Unit takes a deep exploration into our low governance participation rate. They highlight several problems and their potential causes. They provide a list of potential solutions across multiple horizons and push for community discussion and feedback to help initiate improvements in low governance participation. Next up, following up on the strategy process review call last month, ACE moves forward by proposing to vote as a community on 3 to 5 most important strategic focus areas. The real world finance core unit team presents as as a poll, their own opinions for 3 strategic focus areas and ask the community whether there are other areas that we should also focus on. And finally, with recent discussions in the community regarding centrifuge legal structures, Centrifuge has expressed its willingness and commitment to become an arranger and upgrading its structuring framework to accommodate maker token holder requirements. In response, William R. proposes a global debt ceiling and asks the community whether and how it should be implemented for CFG. Moving on to our active signal requests. Ultra Shupi is signaling to the community and requests to increase the surplus buffer. He asked the community where we want to set the surplus buffer and whether we want to burn some of our profits. Next up.
Really quickly on this
Yes.
signal request, I know Maker Breaker has been posting in the governance chat about like the fact that this might become an instant runoff vote, and there's kind of like a little bit of nuance. I want to just take a pause and see if anybody from Gov Alpha kind of wants to comment on that before we move forward. If not, it's okay. We can cover it later.
Yeah, I think it's Maker Breaker here. You don't have to talk. Obviously, I'm happy to give my thoughts, but I'll give you a chance first. No worries, no mic. Yeah, so basically we have been using this formula to get signals onto on-chain pool for a while. It's not perfect, but it does kind of allow for the most amount of people to be happy when voting is done actively, right? Because you're voting for anything that you would accept or would support when going to the signal. So while sometimes the outcomes might look a little funky, you are kind of capturing the largest part of the off-chain sentiment. And then one cool thing is you can always change your vote, engage in chat, kind of rally for one particular option. So if you don't like how things are shaking out, we encourage you to head to that thread because it's not until the signal is closed that we use the vote calculations to put it up there.
Yeah, cool, thank you. And also, like, if you're curious about the more specific concern that GovAlpha has, read Maker Breaker's latest comment on that signal request thread, and that'll give you the details. All right, Artem, it's back to you.
All right, let's continue with the next signal request. All right, so DAI minted from WBTC has recently been increasing with popularly increasing with a large amount of DAI over the last few months, and a large market downturn on WBTC vaults that run a higher liquidation ratio are less likely to undergo liquidations. In response to that, Ultra Shupi signals to the community asking whether we should add a new WBTC vault with a higher liquidation ratio. And then we have Bourbon asked the community to burn half of MKR in the treasury and use the remainder to vest core units. Next up, with no clear indication about what should be the source for MKR used in future expenses, Maker Breaker presents 2 options: use MKR from the MakerDAO treasury or mint new MKR using the pause proxy. Next up, with gas and ETH prices continuing to go up, our dust limits offer less protection against losses, and in response, Money Supply proposes whether we should increase dust limits for all vault types. And moving into our final signal request, the original DSS vest stream for Governance Communications Core Unit was configured incorrectly, resulting in an unclaimed 39,300 DAI. Initially, the team believed they could slide through their 4-month stream period using the buffer and other savings. However, legal services and additional expenses recently arose, which pushed David Utro to formally ask the community whether they support a one-off governance request for a one-time payment of a little over 27,000 DAI. That's it for the forum at a glance. For more information, check out the forum at a glance post that includes a 3-point summary, evaluations and reports, ongoing initiatives, and help wanted.
Awesome. Appreciate it, Artem. Do check the chat. We got a few people trying to submit. Just want to make sure we're letting everybody we expect in here. Cool. So we have moved on to our kind of governance discussion, or I guess kind of update discussion could be risk related as well, right? And this is on the alternative market condition preparation. David, I know you're kind of putting together a list for this, or yeah, if you want to.
Yeah, so I was gonna say we're gonna try like a slightly different format. So this is a pretty broad topic that has a lot of subtopics within it, and so I prepared a handful of slides just to prompt us in the discussion. And so the first prompt is: are we prepared for alternative market conditions? What does being prepared mean? And I guess that's kind of like number one. Yeah. Are we prepared? And what does being prepared mean? I guess like maybe we could actually, so there's three prompts. Are we prepared? What happens in a collateral bear market? Because that's the main sort of alternative market condition that people are thinking about. You know, right now we've been in somewhat of a decent bull market, but of course markets happen in cycles, and when things go up, rates and debt ceilings and things behave one way, DAI demand and supply behaves one way, and then when things go down, it behaves a different way. And so I guess maybe it might be better to start with prompt 2 of like what happens actually in an alternative market condition like a bear market. How will DAI supply behave? And I think canonically, it's kind of understood that when people's collateral is falling, people are either rushing to add more collateral or they are buying DAI off the market to repay their positions. So typically in a bear market, my understanding is that DAI demand becomes excessively strong. And so with the introduction of the PSMs this year, this is actually kind of okay for the peg because we have a few billion of buffer to kind of eat that extra DAI demand. But I'm curious if anybody has other views of things that we might not be considering for what happens in a bear market, and also what happens after the PSMs get drained, for example. What are our fallback levers and stuff? Yeah, go for it.
Jump in here for a second, David. In a bear market, the PSMs don't get drained; they get filled because DAI is above peg, and people will, fire in USDC to mint cheap DAI and then sell it to arb the peg. That's why we got to like 60% USDC in the first place. Like we kind of already know what happens in a bear market because that's what we experienced after Black Thursday with DAI persistently above the peg. Ultimately resulting in the introduction of the PSMs. And taking on a bunch of centralized stable coins. I think the biggest concern with that sort of situation is that if it happens again in the future, like what if it gets even worse? What if we go to like 90% USDC, or how high can we afford to go on centralized stable coins before the market, just says, look, why don't we just use the centralized stables instead?
Yeah, so I have a slightly, I totally agree with this, but I have a kind of alternative view on this as well. So, the PSM is basically a residual of DAI demand and DAI supply from borrowers. And normally, of course, if there's a bear market, people will rush to repay their loans. So on the supply side, the DAI minted should shrink. And then on the demand side, it's very possible you're going to see, more people, liquidating their crypto positions from volatile assets, moving to stable assets, which normally means the PSM will grow. But I have an alternative view of this. So it's not really clear what happens with stablecoin holdings in bear market, because most of the stablecoin demand was actually driven by yield farming and all these yields. And it's possible if you're in a bear market, these yields will drop. Now we're seeing them 10% higher. It's possible they drop to a few percent. And in that case, it's questionable how many people will still be, saving or lending their stable coins at, 2%, 3%, because it might be just too risky. even though this yield is better that you get in a bank, it's possible some people might just step out of their, stablecoin positions, and this could affect the DAI as well, right? A bunch of DAI is now on curve. Just imagine if stablecoin for some reason, there's total unwinding stablecoins. I don't believe this will be the case, but it's one possibility, right? You could see even DAI demand going down in a bear market, although I'm less confident, but you could see something like that evolving as well.
I think that's an extremely good point. Can I say one thing really quickly, which is that, it's really a question of how big the different components are, because there's another component that increases DAI demand in bear markets, which is simply that if people think prices are going down, they don't want to hold something volatile like ETH. They might want to sell and wait for lower prices. After Black Thursday, when the DAI peg was persistently high, like, don't forget that was before yield farming was even a thing. Compound didn't start till, the summer after Black Thursday, and we were having a high peg until then. So there was just enough demand of people just wanting to be in stables because of the uncertainty of the market. They didn't care about yields. They just didn't want to be in something that was going down.
Well, I mean, we do have an example of this from 2018 during the bear market with Psy. We didn't have as many tools for maintaining the peg upwards, but I think people do want to exit crypto kind of in the early parts of the bear market. Things have gone up, and then they're going to pull their dollars out to a bank account or something like that, and they're like, it is. I do see an initial spike in demand, but potentially in the longer term, we could lose the demand.
Yeah, I think our default view here should be, I think May 2021, sort of that. I don't know if you want to call it a crash, but a correction, but probably a little bit bigger. So maybe some different things will happen, but I think by default we should be thinking of that as the most likely scenario.
Has Risk or anybody done any sort of like simulation? Because I know Risk does some sort of simulation stuff when you're doing risk assessments, but has there been kind of a simulation of a bear market across like multiple collaterals at the same time, or any sort of thing like that?
So yeah, I mean, we're doing this kind of simulations to calculate risk premiums and what's the surplus buffer needed. Like, you can go on our dashboards and you can actually even yourself tweak parameters, and you see how bad it goes. It is if you simulate 50% drop in a day or versus 40% drop, and you can basically yourself test whatever you believe it's possible to happen. But this is related to risk, right? Now we're talking really about peg management. And this is something else. This is something we actually started doing. We're starting developing a framework, basically. And why we believe this is, it's called ALM framework, asset liability management. This is what actually banks do. And this wasn't problematic for Maker before, because all of our assets and liabilities are short-term, right? Like, we can basically, increase rates and we can decrease supply. And on the demand side, we can basically match the demand, which are the DAI holders. But when it comes to offering fixed rate products, such as institutional vaults or potentially, different retail fixed rate implementations, this becomes really important. And we are actually planning to develop a framework where we, as best as we can, we say this amount of PSM should always be, as a percentage, should always be, of stablecoin backing should always be at Maker, considering all these different scenarios of bear market, bull market. And we plan to run some kind of simulation analysis and say, let's say there's actually a bear market, and what happens on the demand side, considering all these inputs that I mentioned. If yields drop, you also have some whales which actually are delta hedged. So you have DAI supply, which is borrowed, and then it's actually put in AMMs, right? So you have demand and supply matched, and you need to subtract that. So yeah, we're probably trying to solve this. It's going to be really hard because you need to simulate all different versions of next year's bull bear runs. and then try to assess or suggest the reasonable amount of stablecoin backing at Maker that doesn't lead us in some bad back management, or just relying on lowering rates and this kind of stuff, increasing rates. Sorry, if we drain it.
Maybe since we're on the topic of simulations, I'll just mention that I've been running the auction demo keeper in a hard hat forked environment in order to sort of simulate a market crash like this. So I fork it, and then I'm basically like across the board, I'm dropping the price of all of our assets with hard hat down by like 10 or 20. I've even done like 99% just to see what would happen. And the current demo auction keeper, auction demo keeper is set up to use Uniswap v2 liquidity. And there were a number of assets. First, I'll say on larger vaults. So like when I go and liquidate like Nexo in simulation, Uniswap v2 obviously taps out like right away. So we get terrible prices with just that one liquidity source. And then across the board, it seems like Uniswap v2 is like pretty bad for like a number of assets, or like for, you tap it out after a little while. A couple of these were like Ren BTC, Uniswap v2 was not enough to find like depth to even liquidate like a reasonably sized vault. So our, this is maybe even going back to like prompt one, but I don't feel like at least the auction demo keeper, which is one of the sort of myriad approaches of handling liquidations that we have, I don't feel like that is currently ready for a giant liquidation wave. I'm trying to build into it the capability of handling Uniswap v3, but the APIs, everything has changed like quite a bit in v3, and it's taking me longer than I had hoped. And I should also call out that we don't currently have a backstop for wrapped stake death, which is an asset that I will probably personally pump the brakes on for like debt ceiling increases until we know that we have like at least one good liquidator for it. Now, that being said, we've written the smart contract side of both of these things because our team is good at that. But we don't have the portion that we need to actually like run a keeper or to like put this into the backstop keeper yet. So yeah, I would say in simulation, the current auction demo keeper did not perform well. It performed really well on Wild Wednesday because Uniswap v2 was like the source of liquidity, and I don't think we'll get that same level of like performance this next time around. So if you're running a keeper, please, speak up and let me know like what liquidity sources you're using and what you're doing.
Chris, is there a way for future keeper versions, instead of relying on like a single venue, instead to use a proxy like an aggregator and kind of outsource the problem of trying to choose it at the bot level?
Yeah, I think if you can kind of like tool up, one version of the auction demo keeper may make sense to like integrate with 1inch or any of the like DEX aggregators, because then you can use their APIs to find like the best circuit in DeFi and construct that in the client, and then fire that off at 1inch's routers, and it would end up like doing the trade. I think there's a good argument for doing that, because then you don't need to sort of piecemeal put together all of these things. But we really need someone to be working on this. So
yeah, and I guess the trade-off is you get like better pricing and better access to venues, but it's less gas efficient for the keeper, right?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, 1inch is pretty good about trying to find you like a gas efficient circuit. Honestly, at the point where we are liquidating a ton and we've tapped out one liquidity source, I'd rather that we had keepers that were sourcing, even if it was a little more gas expensive, that could find liquidity that would actually like, like reclaim the bad debt. So
yeah, there's I just want to say one other issue with 1inch is that it's required that their web API is online. You can't just route through the smart contracts. So if they go down for whatever reason, those keepers will be screwed.
Yeah, this
Yeah, I
is
was
the
gonna say
defense in depth.
you're taking a certain amount of like trust risk on 1inch, which, you know, okay, maybe then you want to have like the ability to sell through 1inch, Matcha, and Paraswap, all three, and like, you know, so just build more redundancy. And
I mean, is there a way to build it into the bot that there's fallbacks? Like if 1inch fails, use Matcha. If Matcha fails, like
Yeah.
you could build like a whole schema or whatever.
yeah, it's, you know, obviously the more you add, the more complicated and expensive it gets in terms of, you know, effort, but it's, yes, totally theoretically possible.
Yeah, and we do have, I think there's a keeper group being signaled for right now. So my hope is that they'll take over a ton of development on this. The foundation did development on keepers, and you know that was, I think, a extremely critical role in like helping us whenever we had like large liquidations. So.
And just to be clear for the people on the call, you're talking about side stream auction services core unit, right?
Yeah, I am.
So it sounds like an essential part of being prepared is really getting the liquidation keepers on point. But then like there's this other question that pops up in my mind is what about the collaterals that currently have liquidations off altogether? And then also in general, what about the parameters of the liquidation system in terms of like the ilk hole and like the maximum amount of you know, a maximum amount of liquidations you can have at any given time? Like yeah, this question of like price risk, like if there's a ton of liquidations happening, sort of what's Maker's a comfort level or approach with like $1 billion of price risk on ETH or something, you know? So yeah, those are kind of the things floating around in my mind.
So yeah, I'll just say from PE's perspective, ilk hole was meant, so ilk would be a collateral type's maximum amount of, let's say, on auction debt or something. I don't know, Kurt might argue with that definition, but that value should really try and approximate how much liquidity we think will be available for that collateral type on chain. And then the global hole should try and approximate how much liquidity we believe is available for like all sort of die pairings on chain. That is like more complicated circuits that you could actually make on chain. And then, you know, I don't know if we want to also take into account that the rest of the ecosystem is also liquidating at this point. Gas is probably extremely expensive, and so you want to curtail these a little bit. And part of that is, you know, it's this balancing game. You want to liquidate as much as you possibly can, you know, as quickly as you can, before you like tear the whole market down and you get bad rates. So part of capping that for me is also, if those are capped, we allow for like this sort of natural, you know, the auctions take, let's say, like 40 minutes to an hour to recapitalize, right? You have this like 40-minute to an hour buffer where like arbitrage can happen from centralized exchanges and begin to push itself into these pools, or from like more esoteric places and ends up pushing itself in. So that's I think the answer on how we try and set those particular parameters. And I think Risk thinks about it in a similar way. So.
Yeah, I can confirm that. So the ilk hole, which is this auction throughput parameter, it shouldn't be too big so that you don't drain all the liquidity that's on chain. So we basically look it through slippage numbers that we measure, and then we limit it. But it's also constrained by the keeper system itself, right? If we have only implementation with V2, although there's a ton of liquidity elsewhere, you don't want to have too high throughput. And even if you have high throughput, even if there is liquidity, you're still risking this cascading liquidations, right? You might actually affect the prices. And yeah, like these are the limits why you can't liquidate as much as you would want. And it's not ideal. Like Chris said, like if you liquidated the largest vault, it would take, the 1.5 billion vault on ETH, it would take us 10 hours, right? And that's a lot of market risk. Just imagine that price drops further. There's a loss right there. but then it's actually not as bad as it sounds, because in some cases, if you're liquidating in smaller chunks, the borrower can still save itself, right? So if you believe he can react within, if not in the first hour, that he can still save himself, if he can save himself in the second hour, then it's okay, right? Because you don't liquidate, you don't have the market risk. The user still stays with you. It's not wiped out. You still collect stability fees, but again, you need to believe he's gonna save himself, right? But yeah, like how exchanges do it, like they liquidate as much as possible. They don't want to carry any market risk, but we are limited by all these factors.
Awesome, appreciate that insight, Pravesh. I haven't seen too many other questions that haven't been addressed. I don't know if we want to kind of tackle another one of these, David, or pose a different scenario that we're preparing for.
Yeah, so you guys know about the 2 prompts I have. I also have a 3rd prompt. It's what happens in the event of a sudden loss or invalidation of collateral. And I guess this is a little bit less related to specifically a bear market. And it's more related to, like what happens when, a major, government, deems a particular collateral illegal, or maker as a whole illegal, or what happens if collateral recourse is stuck in limbo for 10 years in some lawsuit, and we're just sitting on a few $1 million of stuck DAI that can't get liquidated, or what should be the response if recourse is totally unenforceable. So like those kinds of questions. What happened? And I guess I'm not going to color it, but yeah. So that's prompt number 3. If anybody wants to comment or think on that.
I wonder if before in prompt 1, you talked about an emergency playbook. So before we do prompt 3, because we've talked about prompt 3 a little bit in the past, I did, let's see, are we prepared? Oh yeah, the emergency playbook, yeah, done at the end there.
Yeah, I can speak.
So yeah, so yeah, if you can, David, that'd be great. Speak.
Yeah, sure. So, so I'm David. I'm the facilitator of Governance Communications Core Unit, and a part of our mandate was to support MakerDAO with emergency comms. And in the event of an emergency, it's not so simple as just comms. Like an emergency is a whole domain in and of itself, right? There's proactive measures that you have that the DAO does even before an emergency happens, like threat monitoring at various levels. And then when an emergency does happen, it's like there's 5 or 6 different emergency types, and then underneath those emergency types, there are, derivatives within those types. And so when such an emergency happens, there's a few different coordination tracks that happen. So there's a communications coordination track where, there's internal and external comms that have to be drafted, forum posts have to be drafted, information has to be aggregated, summarized, and shared. Impact assessment has to happen and written on and documented. But then there's also like a technical coordination track where, the engineering teams and key and other key people kind of come into a war room and really assess the exact situation with regards to the emergency. Then there's also a general coordination track where, it's not just engineering, but so there's a few different things. And the emergency playbook that our team is working on sort of encapsulates all of this stuff into a single playbook that then has deeper links to more granular resources. So for example, actually, if you guys would like, I could really quickly share. Actually, no, I won't do that. But I'll briefly say we do have a very, very good first draft already, mostly done. But yeah, so in general, it kind of documents everything as well as the processes for specific emergencies and emergencies in general. So yeah, that's the gist.
Yeah, and so one of these specific versions of the playbook should really be what happens in like a massive collateral crash, or let's just, a huge market teardown. And in that case, I do think that we have like a number of sort of resources available to the maker community and like and others that are, you know, partaking or just like users in the space to help with liquidations. And so what we would want to do is, I mean, it might be hard to like spin up a keeper, but the auction demo keeper is actually not that difficult to spin up. And so we may have a whole track of people that are capable of spinning one up, and they may end up doing that. But people may just show up and have capital as well, and they should use the Web3 liquidators, or they should use you know, the session we had last week of the sort of Web3 liquidator that you know, that uses flash loans or whatever. So yeah, the sort of side stream one. So so there's a number of things. There's also communicating all of that, like on Twitter and to other people, to try and get them to participate in those auctions. And yeah, and aggregating information about it. And then obviously there may be something that happens if things go wrong, right? Like on Black Thursday, something was definitely like going wrong. And then we just, you know, spin up a whole apparatus to try and deal with that and communicate. So.
Yeah, and just to comment a little bit more on that, sorry, really quickly. So on the market event, which is one major category of emergency type that we've identified, we've actually met with the risk team three weeks ago to try to further define what a market event emergency is. And also we do have like a preliminary bucket of resources, which do include, you know, outdated or not outdated. We have to check like keeper resources, links to auction front ends, all of that stuff. And so, yeah, to your point, Chris, like this is certainly a part of being prepared. And this is something that our team at GovComms is extremely focused on, and not just alone. Like we're focused on doing it and building it out in a high quality way with others that are involved in this process, which is pretty much many of the core units like PE, risk, oracles, etc. Sorry, Juan, you were going to say something? I think I cut somebody off.
Chris, do you have the list of the people running those keepers, or at least like who I can contact to understand like the current situation of the keepers? And also the signal group that you mentioned, it is active still? I mean, because I don't know, we should like double check everything that used to work during the foundation times and see if everything is still working or not. And if not, set up a new group. Or I'm just thinking out loud, maybe we should create like a keepers room on our Discord to like have all the keepers there, and in case we need help with liquidations, like ask for help there. I don't know if this should be private or it could be public, I don't know, but I'm asking you this because I don't have that information. I know that during the foundation, usually Greg and Joe were the ones coordinating with keepers. So I'm just wondering if you or anyone else here has these contacts.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have contacts of any keepers. Maybe Nikolai, I don't know.
Yeah, so I can say that in general, the professional market makers who would run keepers out there, they're quite hard to get tabs on, and they're not really that open about what they're doing, because running these keepers, it's like a war game. You know, you want to have the best algorithm to sort of make the most money. So they're very intransparent about how they run their operations. So, and often, you know, for example, with Maker, it's not like there's a constant flow of liquidations. So there's also a lot of opportunities in the market, and they're always like kind of chasing after where there's the most yield. So for Maker, for example, what we've seen often is that we would have someone who's running a keeper, and then all of a sudden they will shut it down because it's not worth it for them to kind of keep optimizing their algorithm if there's only like 2 liquidations every 2 weeks. So it's very hard to keep tabs on because yeah, these actors, they're only incentivized by profits, and there's many ways to earn profits in crypto. So that's why it's so important that we have open tools that anyone can spin up, because we can't rely on these private actors to actually run the keepers or have them up to date for like a market crash. So I know of some keepers, I can reach out to them, but we can't really rely on them. That's my main point.
Yeah, and I think another thing is interesting. Some people have voiced that, you know, our past experiences have been like a blessing in disguise, because really they help us test in practice the health of liquidation system. And I know also in my conversations with Immunify Security and others, there's also like interest on the non-technical side to do stuff like fire drills around like emergency situation preparedness. So I'm curious, like when we do launch collateral types, is there is it a potentially a good idea to have some sort of standardized 3, 6, 1 year, processes where we do some sort of fire drill for the liquidation side to really like be like maybe like as a protocol manually liquidate 5 or 6 like maybe of our own, not customers obviously, but something like that. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm thinking, how can we fire drill our liquidation systems IRL a little bit better?
Yeah, well, still, I like the idea of the grant or hackathon, or bounty. So I think we should like have the keepers chat room on Discord and explain how to like run your own keeper, how to and be like have people there answering questions and all of that. Because like our last experience with a hackathon was that for a lot of new devs, the Maker protocol could be a little bit complicated, so they prefer to develop things for other protocols. So we will need like to have people helping these new devs or maybe new keepers to implement one, especially for Maker.
Yeah, so
Maker.
I just want to add that that's also the reason why SES, now I'm not part of SES anymore, but I was part of helping incubate SideStream. And I mean, that is to have a core unit that is focused exactly on this problem, which is to have up-to-date liquidation tools for the community. And that means that every time a new collateral type is onboarded, then we should also be able to efficiently liquidate it immediately, which is not the case today. Like there's always some tail risk because right now the keepers are not updated immediately. So they would also, I think the idea is that they could also help maintain the auction demo keeper and the documentation around how these things work so that the community can run it, because I know that they are not gonna be like a keeper that is running it, but they wanna make it as accessible as possible for the community to efficiently liquidate these vaults.
Chris, can I ask a question? So something I haven't heard talked about, during Black Thursday, we basically saw evidence of mempool manipulation. And so nobody's really talked about lack of network access for all the tools that we're talking about here, right? And it was unclear to me whether EIP 1559 actually helps us in that respect, and I'm not entirely sure what we can do about it, but this is the missing piece I see here is like, what happens if you lose network access? You're kind of dead in the water here. We don't have any sort of plan for how to deal or even set up liquidations if we just don't have access to a network.
Yeah, I mean, if you lose access to the memory pool or the nodes, what's going to happen with the current liquidation system is that time is going to continue to tick and the price is going to continue to fall. What's nice is that we have a catch for that at a certain cusp or a certain like tau amount of time passed. I think it's the cusp that catches it first, but it basically says that like 60 or 50% price fall, it basically forces if the auction is redone. So if we do lose access to the mempool, The worst case would be you lose access until like those collaterals were right before the sort of cutoff, and then someone was able to fire through and take them for this like cheaper amount. But we wouldn't see like the one-way bidding the way we did on Black Thursday. So there's a bit of a protection there. And I think EIP 1559 will help.
Now, it was unclear to me whether 1559 would help. I was, but the other thing is there's might be a possibility that we could use an operative L2 when the L1 kind of isn't working that well, right? It's kind of a whole different mechanic, and we'd have to think about it. But we do have other networks that, if we could source liquidity there and provide kind of a promise token, right? That, you buy this ETH and we're selling it, you're going to get it, right? Just a way to have a backup network if the primary network no longer functions, that we might be able to source liquidity on.
Maybe once wormholing is finished, there could be a way to use wormholing liquidation, like wormholing for liquidation service.
Yeah, it will solve everything, wormholing.
So I have another thing that's related. So I was recently listening to a podcast that talked a lot about kind of like provable fairness in NFT auctions. And I'm curious if anybody's been thinking about kind of like improvements on that side, and would that help with kind of like the mempool manipulation thing? And is there a way, kind of to take things off chain? Yeah, these are just some thoughts flowing around my head.
An interesting question, David, because in theory you could expect more participants, right, if they knew they had a fair shake at it.
Yeah, like to give you guys an example of what I mean. So like one of the things that some smart NFT auctions do is they take orders, but they don't take them on chain. So they batch the orders until the time of the auction kind of comes to a head, and then they execute. So the orders don't actually ever go on chain. It's all done off chain, and then the execution is actually just determined after the fact and processed and executed. So like schemes like that, I could probably like post the link to the specific thing that I'm talking about. But yeah,
I'll say that like Gauntlet had a sort of interesting liquidation system that we evaluated when we did Liquidations 2.0. That sort of sounded a little more like this. But was it Gauntlet or was it Gnosis? I can't remember. It was Gnosis. Sorry.
You're thinking of the batched auctions.
So the reason we didn't go with a batch system yet, or for this iteration, is that the protocol was going to take on so much collateral at this point that we knew that like waiting for any kind of capitalized keeper to handle this was going to be a hindrance to us. And so we really tried to leverage single block composability and allow our auctions to go around and source liquidity from as many sources as it possibly can on the chain that it's on. And so this actually will get interesting, because if in the future we do think most capital is probably going to end up moving to L2s, and L1 is going to be a settlement layer for all of that like call data that's happening on L2s. And if that world materializes, we are going to need for anything that's on L1 some sort of like wormholing liquidation strategy where we can like give DAI to this thing, and it will handle the liquidation and then settle it over the course of like a week or something like that, right? So there will be like innovations we need in the future.
I mean, I also think in that world, you have to move a majority of your native DAI issuance to the L2s as well, and so that the DAI is, or so that the positions are held at the same place the liquidity is. Essentially like how much actual, or how many actual, or like the size of the actual vaults you can support on L1 gets highly constrained by what liquidity is actually available on L1. In fact, I can imagine a possible future in which L1 is basically just 100% roll-up commitments, and like everything happens on L2s. And actually one of the risks I'm worried about is that the market is currently underestimating the speed with which this could happen potentially. And so it just as an aside, I think that's something to keep an eye on, is at what point does, say, 50% of Ethereum block space become, all L2s, and how long after that until it's 99%, et cetera, because these L2s have an economy of scale where they can afford to pay higher gas prices because they're basically compressing so many transactions.
So we talked a bit about sort of what Maker fundamentally at home base can do to improve liquidations, but I'm curious about a different kind of approach. How can we educate our vault users to use risk mitigation tools like DeFi Saver, and is that a good idea for us as a protocol to be pushing third-party risk mitigation tools? What's our kind of duty there? What's our comfort level there? And yeah, is it a good idea?
It's a great idea unless we really want to rent seek liquidations, right? So I mean, right now we've got a liquidation penalty. It's intended to sort of stop auction grinding attacks, which is this way of in a collateral crash of minting a bunch of unbacked DAI. So we've got this 13% liquidation penalty to sort of stop this, but it turns out in practice that liquidation penalty ends up creating an enormous amount of income for the protocol, which is a side effect of it. And I think we should continue to think of it as a side effect of liquidations. Otherwise, we're too likely to try and rent seek that particular mechanism. And so as a result, I do think it makes sense. I mean, DeFi Saver is doing a ton of work ahead of time. I think this is a major feature for users as well. The fact that we have this delayed Oracle price allows them to sort of see the future and basically stop themselves from being liquidated with these services. And that's a major selling point, I think, over other protocols. So yeah, I think we should lean on that heavily, or think about alternative liquidation schemes like B protocol or something like that. But leave our liquidations, the system that we have, as the sort of, like I said, it's defense in depth, right? Or the Swiss cheese approach, right? If you make it through the first hole and the first layer of Swiss cheese, hopefully we'll catch you with our liquidation system, after that. So, by the way, I'll say for stake death right now, I think the stats are that most of the stake death growth is happening through DeFi Saver and has automation turned on, which means that our stake death growth right now, even though we don't have a liquidator to service it, is mostly protected by DeFi Saver. So.
Yeah, good point. And also Nikolai puts up a really interesting point. Vault protection makes us more money because users are more comfortable getting close to the liquidation ratio. That's interesting. I never considered that. And also, as a side note, I think that based on my reading of the forums over the last couple of years, I think the consensus is pretty high that DAO members want eventually MakerDAO to have zero liquidations, and that that 13% penalty is really a function of a game theoretical necessity to prevent auction grinding attacks, as you mentioned. So I've always seen support for third-party risk mitigation. I'm a little bit less concerned about the rent seeking part, just because of, I guess, the views of the collective that I've been reading over the last couple of years.
Well, there's one, and this is maybe debatable, but on Wild Wednesday, we ended up having so many profits that the burner kicked on hard, multi-millions of dollars went to the burner. And and that, when I originally was looking at the graphs of MKR, it did look like it was supporting the MKR price, but then I was less convinced later on. So I think the jury's still out, but that's almost exactly, if that's a happy accident, that's almost exactly the sort of virtuous thing that you'd want to happen to MKR. While the market's crashing, this thing would actually support MKR in the case that it may need to flop MKR later to cover back.
Okay, I'll have to kind of jump in and give an alternate perspective here now, which is that, right? So in the happy case where things dip, the system buys the dip, and then everything goes back up, and there's no bad debt. That's great, sure. But in the case where the market dips, we get some surplus from penalties, use that to buy MKR, and then the market dips a lot more, and then something goes wrong. There's network congestion or liquidity constraints, and we end up with a bunch of bad debt. Well, I guarantee you the MKR price is now a lot lower than what the system bought it at. And if we have to reprint MKR to, that was burned previously, we're going to print a lot more than was burned. And we would have been a lot better off just saving that surplus for the crash. So it's really like an asymmetric risk, and in my opinion, an asymmetric risk of the bad kind. Like the downside is worse than the upside. And I would just counsel against the thought that buying and burning is a perfect capital battery, because it's not.
Extremely good point.
Actually, I was chatting with AES. We were looking at gas costs, right, and trying to figure out what our emergency buffer is. And we are honestly thinking that the time you wanted to buy ETH is kind of when you're crashing, because that's when your gas prices are going to be highest for oracles and everything you might want to do. So we might want to reconsider what we buy with our excess DAI when we're crashing.
Yeah, I think there's actually a big debate to be had about how should the protocol diversify its treasury, because that's basically what you're doing. If you're taking the surplus buffer and say buying ETH or something, now you're basically diversifying your treasury into other assets, and what mix of assets does it make sense for the DAO to hold, is I think a really interesting discussion with a lot of room for creative improvements.
Right on. Well, do want to encourage everyone, if there are topics or aspects of this we haven't got to yet, we're kind of inching towards the end of the meeting, so it would be good to bring those up. But I do really appreciate all the people participating in the discussion.
Yeah, and I'll
talk a little.
Yeah, go for it.
Hey, thanks, man. I can talk a little bit about what our team's been thinking or talk about in terms of educating vault users. Basically, our thinking is the best policy is to be agnostic towards what solutions we encourage people to use, but be focus on educating people on what solutions are out there and what the pros and cons are between using the different solutions. So we've talked about doing like educational videos and that sort of thing, but decided that actually probably wasn't a good idea because it's hard to do something that could be evergreen. Like if we made a video specifically about how to use Oasis, but not DeFi Safer, then obviously that looks like we're favoring one over the other. But so for now, at least, we've focused on putting this information or getting this information into the community portal. It's pretty basic at this point, but yeah, looking forward to adding more information there as we get it. Yeah, if anybody has other thoughts about stuff we could be doing to create or inform users around those, please feel free to reach out.
Yeah, I apologize for the background. So I was in the car when you guys were talking about the PSM. And one of the things that's kind of really changed since the, I wouldn't say the Wednesday, but the Black Thursday, is that, the impetus to mint DAI was a high DAI price, right? And now we don't have that impetus anymore. And so, how the PSM is going to act in different situations, I think the discussions previously that we might have some different kind of activity with respect to DAI demand and minting, given the fact that the price is effectively locked, is important to consider. That it's just really unclear what's going to happen. I mean, there's a general tendency to think that the PSM will just fill up, and nobody discussed, well, what happens if USDC doesn't, or stable coins just don't want to move in there for the price, right? And then basically the peg goes high because everybody's like, hey, I actually think my stable coins like USDC is better than DAI at this particular moment. And so I'm not going to go in there. And so the peg actually can run high. And if it did, that's when someone might actually decide, hey, maybe I'll go take advantage of this. But it's the real price thing that actually makes people move here. And when you lock the price, you're left with risk and rates. And at that time, your rates aren't going to do much. And then you're just left with dealing with the risk as the market's dealing with it.
I'm expecting Brian to hop right in after that. We'll see that. Thanks for that reflection, Maker Man.
Yeah, Makerman, when you were on sabbatical, Brian and I were making these exact arguments about losing that like natural incentive to mint DAI by going to a PSM. So
Yeah, but I mean, okay, I'm going to have to jump in here again now, because back when we did have that so-called natural incentive, I think what we saw empirically is it's just extremely weak, right? There is this natural incentive after, Black Thursday. Hey, DAI price was hard, but it was high, but people were either too scared of putting money in Maker or just didn't have the appetite for leverage, to take advantage of it. And I agree that if you had waited long enough and let the price get high enough, it would have eventually motivated people to mint, maybe. I guess that's an empirical question, but I
No,
believe at some point the
I pretty much
incentive
agree
kicks
with
in.
you. Yeah, I pretty much agree with you.
The thing that we saw was that DAI adoption was being abandoned because, for better or for worse, the integrators of DAI had come to rely on having a very tight peg, and they just couldn't tolerate, from a business perspective, a 4 or 5 cent, or 4 or 5%, persistent deviation. And so the market just basically told us, like, we don't want a soft pegged currency. It's not good for us. And it's very hard to go back and reverse that sort of expectation once it gets locked in.
yeah, to the second part of your question, Makerman, I do think that if the market really does want to hold on to USDC or DAI breaks peg high, I do think there's an interesting situation with like liquidity providers. Like liquidity providers are basically going to allow there to be an ARB because they're like asleep at the wheel, basically, right? So like whatever, if people actually have a preference for, let's say DAI over USDC or USDC over DAI or whatever, I still think it's all going to just get worked out through those sources. It's not until we tap those pools up that I think we're in danger.
Well, in general, I agree, right? I mean, it was the reason why, I was the one who proposed, or I'm sure other people talked about it, but really pushed for USDC during Black Thursday because we were kind of stuck. We had no collateral that wanted to move in to mint DAI, and we needed to fill a $6 million hole, right? And so, there's this real issue of like, what's a good collateral that's not going to liquidate? And we put up one that absolutely would not liquidate. Like we set it to 1 and just said, we're not going to liquidate this collateral. And everybody's like, hey, hallelujah, and then we made it into a vault, right? And so, talk about the liquidity. I was looking at the V3, the G uni, right? And you look at that V3, it's a very tight band that's supposed to be able to move around on, with the bots that are going to post a new transaction to float that liquidity into a new band. Well, what if they can't? That you're stuck with the key liquidity I look at that's going to source here is V2 because it's never going to go away, or it has to pull. And if it can't access network, it can't pull. And if anybody can access the network, they can't drive it to 0. Whereas V3, they can pass right through that band and they can drive that V3 price right to 0, right with that liquidity straight up, And so you talk about like where the liquidity is. I keep insisting that we need to have a real price band, because when you have a price band, you have fees, and fees will find liquidity. And that liquidity is going to be there potentially to be sourced if it's in the right configuration. If you have to do a bot and post a transaction on the network, everybody and his brother is going to be fighting for those transactions and getting in front of each other and whatever. It's the worst time to try and manage your network and be prepared with liquidity is when you don't have it and there's impaired network access. And so you want to have things set up so that it's there and ready to go when you need it, not be struggling to find it when it's there. So, but in principle, I agree with you. I think it was Kurt, or it could have been Brian, but basically that during that time, all your basic liquidity is bad except for these stable coins. And so you're kind of stuck with like, what do you do? That the PSM is going to be what's left. That's pretty gas inefficient. And then you have a vault maybe, and so there's just not a lot of places that we can deposit collateral and find liquidity should the price drive in a direction. It's a standing issue. We'll see what happens if it ever happens, and let's hope not.
Sorry, just let me jump in on that. We do have liquidity in that type of emergency crisis. I mean, that is quite literally what trusts, cash, and treasuries are there for. So there's no that kind of epic crisis. There is a mitigation for that.
Yeah, but isn't like certain liquidity, it's available, but there's no precedent to use it. Like, like we have liquidity in our treasury, but what's the precedent for us, being our auction auction keepers, right? Like, should Maker Protocol be one of the participants? I don't know. But
Well,
that's
it
kind
actually, our treasury will naturally cover like bad debt, right? Because whenever we
as a maximum,
liquidate,
yeah.
so whenever we liquidate, it immediately comes out of the surplus buffer. So that's the first thing. If we see a giant liquidation wave, don't panic. Everyone's going to see the surplus buffer basically drop, like in just by insane numbers. Your first inclination is going to be like, oh shit, it's Black Thursday again. You don't need to panic. That's what happens. And then we reclaim the DAI from those auctions, and it goes back into the surplus buffer. So yeah, that's just so that does sit there sort of naturally.
See, that's going to trigger
that
a bit
actually
of a
covers
communications thing. Yeah,
yeah. Did I cut out by Starlink?
You're back.
Yeah, sorry. So anyway, I was just saying, don't panic if you see the surplus buffer drop in a wave of liquidations. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're taking on bad debt. It's just because it hits that surplus buffer first. And then it'll recapitalize if the auctions are performing well. If they're not, then that's going to become like real bad debt. So yeah, to Matt's point, and also I think it was your third slide, I think that real world assets do give us a bit of a like we can kind of roll our own sort of PSM with real world assets as well. So there's this capability that we have now that we have real world assets, and you could even think of like the success facility as a real world asset in emergency, right? So you could, especially if we set one up like independently. So if DAI is going really high, you can just basically mint effectively unbacked DAI, immediately drop it on the market, drops the peg. That DAI, so when you drop it on the market, that's because it moved through, it went to the broker dealer that's going to sell it on the market, which drops DAI on the market. And then that turns into US dollars in a bank account, right? And maybe even turns into bonds or some other thing if you wanted it to. But the US, that would basically allow for like more downward pressure on the peg, even if the USDC PSM didn't exist. So we actually have our own way to basically do a PSM now. So, and then of course in the opposite direction, it's the same thing. You go and you buy the DAI off the market and repay the debt amount. And all you've got to do is just probably set the like loan facility for that to 0. So we don't need USDC anymore to do a PSM. So I'll say that again. We don't need USDC or other stables to do a PSM. We can do it ourselves now.
So just to clarify, would that basically be like empowering a particular trustless because of the legal structure of like success, for example? Or like, I don't know, I don't say trustless, I don't know if that's accurate, but so we would be empowering a particular actor that's already in our system to be able to remedy a market liquidity crisis. And we would be able to do that, with not with no collateral, but we would be able to print DAI and then collateralize it by using that DAI to buy stuff like treasuries and US dollars. Or is that kind of like, yeah, is that the right way of thinking it?
Yeah, exactly. It's our own USD bank deposits, basically. So if we used a facility like that. Yep.
Awesome. Appreciate that reflection and the kind of opportunity for different ways to keep the protocol safe. Keeping an eye on the time here. We are nearing half past the hour, which is usually about when we tend to wind things down. So I do want to give people one more chance. If there are questions or comments that have gone unaddressed, please do speak up now.
Yeah, also, if you guys want to go off topic, feel free to.
A little harder with such an exciting topic to begin with, right? See Jerry in chat.
Yeah, I was going to actually mention it. Yeah, so I see Jerry in chat. But while people are thinking up other questions, comments, Jerry mentions that we're going to be doing a full AMA about the wormhole tomorrow with Sam, aka Hexanon, and Chris. Chris Kazor. If anybody wants to join, the link is in the chat there. It's also available on the calls calendar. If you would like a link to the calls calendar, I will post it in just a moment.
Right on. Brief note on scheduling as well. We will still be having, and you are still sharing your screen, David. Always good to call that out, right? Brief note on scheduling. We will still be having a call next week. I expect a lot of US people may not be joining us, but that's fine. We are a global organization, so we'll keep trucking on and yeah, hopefully have another fun and exciting one to engage with.
I'll leave people with one last shower thought, since we were discussing different types of risks on here, and I think we kind of focused on the more important one for sure, so it was the correct one to focus. But there is a risk in the other direction. Imagine that, say, we don't have a major global macro deflationary event, and the US, kind of keeps printing dollars and fueling this bull run in risk assets. Imagine we get to a point where all the PSMs are empty and DAI is trading at 98 cents. How, right, at that point, our solution becomes, okay, it's time to raise rates. It's time to raise the DSR. How quickly could we do that? And, what if, we get into the situation where we're raising and it's not working? Like what does that world look like? And, I'm not saying we'll necessarily get into it, but you should keep in mind that there's the possibility for like melt ups as well as meltdowns. And who knows, we may find ourselves in that world at some point.
And let me just jump in and comment on that from at least the real world, like the trust side of this equation and lending out capital, because there's another piece to this and call it like the next evolution of the phases, indifferent to the scope, the scale of what at least I'm trying to achieve, and then ultimately changing out the scope and scale. There's an entire other level of bringing on a full-on bank revolver, engaging with the exact same collateral while they're segregated, having a facility set up. Now, in that type of scenario, if DAI, just humor the scenario, went down to 95, and the natural market maker obviously is, inside of crypto, but also the external side, the exact reverse equation where we'd be refinancing the existing debt structures we have outstanding with another revolver, paying back 100 cents on the dollar to turn right back around and repay the loan that we had in DAI, buying it at 95 cents, pushing it back up. The whole benefit of using real world assets is there's an entire capital market to push that. Basically, there's a natural arbitrage there, and it's a market maker.
Yeah, and then aside from that, there's the old, there's that natural, like vault holders are going to want to repay their debt because it's like they got their interest rate for free, right? So vault holders end up like having a natural incentive to repay. We can also start to raise rates, which is going to disincentivize creating new DAI, and it's going to incentivize closing positions. And then we get to take, so it's not a rent-seeking thing. What we didn't have in 2019 is the DSR, which is that we can then also stimulate demand for DAI on the reverse side. So we can increase the DSR, and then people will want to like actually hold DAI. And so I think we have a lot of tools on the downside. Yeah, but there's also some there was an interesting idea about the PSM and having like, let's say more automated governance around like the tout or even TN and T out if you wanted. But the idea would be to create like this this buffer. This is a discussion the other day, and I think governance or maybe speculation, I can't remember. Yeah, where you create like a buffer, like at a 500 million, all of a sudden tout starts to like move up a little bit so that you create this like more of a buffer and gives us more time to react, but prevents us from like hard DAI market shocks where it drops below like 98 cents or something. So yeah, there's a lot of options.
Like Seb has some bad.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, because we work on that with Primoz on the ALM part, that currently we don't have long maturity assets We have a little bit for real world asset, but that's very small currently. But if we get some term lending and institutional vault are part of it, that means that we cannot raise the yield on those. Or if we do, it will be kind of breaching the gentleman agreement we have with the institution. And then you can be in a case where you have, let's say, 8 billion of loans at 1%, which are term loans. You are not allowed to move them for the next 6 months. And maybe in the future, it will be directly in the smart contract. Then you have the DSR, that you have nothing else in the PSM. You increase the stability fees on ETH and others, but let's say there is nothing left and DAI continue to fall down. We can increase the DSR. If you increase the DSR above 1%, you will start to burn cash because you are spending more on DAI than what you get from the bonds or the loans. So it can be tricky. It's not a problem for this year, not for next year, but it will become more and more tricky going forward, because you can have a maturity mismatch between the asset and liabilities.
Yeah, so what Seb just outlined was kind of the exact sort of thing I was trying to get people to think about, which is that, you know, what we have with the PSM right now is like it's instant relief, right? As soon as the DAI goes a little bit high, instant ARP. Once the PSM's empty, and if DAI starts, you know, deviating below the peg, you can be in this situation where, like, theoretically you have tools to deal with it, but the time scale of that response might be much longer than would be ideal. So I think what Matt highlighted about being able to, if we have large real world asset loans that can, you know, kind of nimbly move to lower their cost of capital, you know, that could be one mitigation.
I think another important thing is actually something that Joshua just brought up with IAMs. You know, so IAMs are a tool that governance can use to implement, you know, like if we need to do a really fast change somewhere, we could do it through an IAM because it gives like a very specific permission to do so. So I guess like my open-ended question for the DAO is, are there parameters that should have an IAM? For example, like tint out on PSMs, for example, like, I don't know, liquidation parameters, for example, like, I don't know, et cetera, et cetera.
I think the short answer is yes. The long answer is every sort of automation comes with like a sort of risk of like doing it incorrectly, or, you know, having some peril. But I think that we should be heavily thinking about how to governance minimize what we can. Mostly because like the cognitive load to just manage all of this is going to far outpace our capacity as humans to handle it. So thinking about these things ahead of time and in setting up an instant access module that sort of behaves correctly in all of these different scenarios for particular parameter changes is probably a good idea. But again, you've got to be really careful. And some of the stuff we can't do easily yet. We can't easily set rates on chain right now. The formula is complicated.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right on. Well, we're edging up against the end of the time, so I think it'll be good to call it there, but let's keep the discussion going, both in the forum and as well as in the Discord.
Yeah, by the way, the chat.makerdao.com does link to our Discord, so don't worry.
Right on. Well, thank y'all for attending, and for those watching it later, see you next week.